Everybody wants that first contract. Everybody thinks that that first contract is going to be it. What they don't realize is that $1.5 million isn't all profit. If you go into that not knowing what your pricing is, it's very easy to get upside down. Things happen. Not every contract is going to go perfectly. There are so many bumps in the road. But this is kind of a start of an opportunity for you to have a relationship. There's anyone that might be in the audience that's trying to find their way in this market. Let's figure out who buys what you sell. If you don't know who buys what you sell, you're shooting blind.
All right. Welcome back to the Construction Game Podcast. Super excited to be here with you today with Ashley. Ashley, where are you calling in from?
I'm calling in from sunny Tampa Bay.
Love it. Love it. I used to live down in Wesley Chapel, Florida, which is right near that Tampa area. So cool. So can you give us a little background about yourself?
Yeah, so I got into government contracting in my early 20s through a friend who was already in the space. And I got a job at this company he was working with. And within a few weeks, I just kind of realized we were all figuring it out as we went along, if you will. We weren't always compliant. We just didn't know what we didn't know. So, but I was hungry, and over 4 years, I stayed with that company, worked my way up the chains to director of sales. I was managing about 35 under me, and with that training. So I'm actually training them on a space that I'm still actively learning myself, because things change so often in government contracting, which sounds terrifying, but that's really how you learn, by doing. So there's kind of one moment that even really defines that whole era for me. It was around 2011 when sam.gov was born. Not SAM as we know it today, where, the solicitations live. At that time, it was just the CCR, ORCA, EPLS kind of all coming together and getting combined. And for months, the system was just down. And they happened to take down the CCR the same day that they launched sam.gov. And what had happened was nobody got paid. And this went on for months and months and months. Now, officially, the government will tell you that it launched in 2012. But those of us who were around back then know better. It was definitely 2011. And folks weren't getting paid. So a dear friend of mine, and still a colleague to this day who works for us, figured out by trial and error that if you select these certain boxes and enter data in this certain way, that you would get an active cage code. So when we figured that out, sort of the floodgates opened. And that was sort of my first taste of being found when they're looking and micro purchases. So we did really, really well just making sure that that agencies got paid, that contractors got paid, and saved a lot of businesses from going under. So to this day, I kind of believe that crisis is originally what gave birth to what we know today as the SAM support as a service, which sadly has kind of morphed into this email spam campaign, but that's neither here nor there. Eventually, I relocated, left the company, and went independent. And those clients that I picked up along the way as a consultant, some of whom are even teaming partners today, is kind of what keeps me in this industry and keeps me learning.
Awesome. Great. That's awesome. So what do you do in the whole government contracting space?
Good question. So a couple different things. I do have GovCon Hacks, which is a free to low-cost education platform. We're very active on YouTube and probably train now 25,000 roughly small businesses through our partnerships with Apex Accelerator, VBox, Govology, etc. And Dual Dev, my company, we provide more or less back office assistance now. So we're doing the hands-on stuff that the small business owners just really don't have the time to do. That includes business development, proposal management, systems implementation. So that's where probably the most of the last 3 years has really been our strength in helping them build up that infrastructure, that back office infrastructure, so that they can scale and grow in the government space.
Got it. Got it. So like, let's just walk it through. So somebody gets a contract, right? Do you help them get the contract and then also help them run the contract? And what I mean by run the contract is like invoice the government. Are you like, processing submittals and all that stuff, RFIs, or is it more of like on the finance side?
Not finance at all, no. So
Okay.
I,
All right.
do advisory and contract administration, but I'm not doing that piece myself. It's more, how do you find, bid on more, and be more efficient in what you're already doing. And then there's also the project management side to the post-award management. So I do have a couple partners where I will sort of put on my project management hat and help them set up their projects, make sure their reporting requirements are met with real-time dashboards. In with that is vendor management. So there's a lot of compliance in managing these subcontractors, right? You know that,
Yeah.
Oliver. I don't have
Yeah.
to tell you, you're
Yeah.
preaching to the choir here.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so, one lap certification or credential could really cost the prime a contract. So we sort of make sure that we, in some cases, act as the small business liaison and making sure that all of that stuff is documented, it's tracked, we have records of it in case anybody were to come back and audit.
Right, right, right. That makes sense. Now, are you doing this for like really large companies or are these like really small companies or it's kind of a mixture of both?
A mixture of both. Our most common client is a small business, though we do have our other than smalls. Really they utilize us for convenience. Once you hit 25 million, you don't really want your internal team knowing your executive comp. So, there's a use case for administrative support externally where SAM, SBA certifications, and that type of thing is concerned. So we do support the whole lot, though our most common is small.
Understood. Understood. Great. So when you were working with the first company, was that in a similar role? Like you were on the like basically contract administration, contract support, helping find projects, or was this more of like, yeah? Can you just go a little deeper into that?
No, good question. That's a really good question. I was more back then procurement readiness, transitioning companies from the commercial space or just startups, solopreneur SMEs into government contracting. Maybe they were key personnel in a contract, they're getting into business. So I was kind of helping them stand up SAM, SBA certifications, GSA schedule, that sort of thing. But it was, after they had all these things, what do you do with it? And,
Yeah.
found that there was a big gap between having the things and the actual execution. And that's what I found is that where most small businesses really thrive is when they have someone that knows what they're doing that can kind of step in their business and guide them and their team.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's a really interesting space. That's awesome to hear that you have experience there. So like just thinking through that, I mean, I have a lot of people that are looking for mentorship from me that are really in that space as well. So like what are the top three things or character traits of those people that you've seen in that space that are, like literally can excel to the next level because they have X and they do Y and they do Z. Like what are those things that you've
Accountability
seen?
is the biggest, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of folks that want to get into contracting, maybe because they saw a YouTube video or a podcast or for whatever reason, but they don't really understand the fundamentals of business. So you can be a subject matter expert at what you do, and we can teach you what you need to know to survive in the landscape. But the differentiator is when you don't have a business and you don't have that professional experience to sort of lean back on, that's where my job becomes a little bit more challenging. So, we can't help everyone, but we have helped, a lot of innovative companies sell new ideas to government. A lot of construction and specialty trade firms expand their partner portfolio, whether that be through mentor protege, joint venture, et cetera.
Great, great, great. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's huge, right? That's really huge because a lot of like even thinking about my team, right? My team,
Hmm.
the team members that we have that are the high performers are ones that like have the subject matter experts, but like they also are entrepreneurs, right? And I've taught them to be entrepreneurs. Like, you can't just be like just great at this. You have to kind of be thinking about it from a business standpoint. Does this make sense? Like, financially, like, step back. Does this financially make sense for this person for us to hire this person and or whatever it may be? So yeah, no, I think that's a huge thing, because like having the business acumen is so important for the overall success of the business. And once you get to certain levels, like, all the decisions can't be made by me. So now we need
Right.
the next group of people to have that same entrepreneurial thought process and mindset. And especially if they're helping run projects or helping us go after projects, like they have to have it, right?
Absolutely. And you bring up a good point too, because there are a lot of decisions that we have to make as entrepreneurs in this industry, right? And there are going to be a lot of people, the moment you register in SAM, your phone's going to blow up, your email is going to blow up. You have to get really good at deciphering the legitimate from the not. And to your point, there have been many small businesses that have gone through certification processes. We'll just keep it simple. Through a certification process that the government will never use. Take woman-owned small business, for example. That certification is most valuable where women are underrepresented. Construction is one of those spaces. So that's viable, but in the training space, they're far less likely to use it, in certain NAICS codes. But that's not going to stop the third-party provider that's jumping in the small business email box telling them to get this certification or to get this schedule or to get this or get that. So being able to kind of execute your decision-making process with two factors. Number one, does the data support this? And number two, is this in alignment with my long-term goals? Those are the two most important things to avoid that sort of just jumping off the track, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree with you on that. And one of the things with the certifications is, I was always like, from a young age, my dad would always say like, hey, the certifications might get you in the door, but like once you actually get in the door, you got to perform, you got to execute, you got to like do the work, and you got to do it good. Right. So what is your overall thought process on that?
You're absolutely right. Everybody wants that first contract, right? Everybody thinks that that first contract is going to be it. What they don't realize is that $1.5 million isn't all profit. So if you go into that not knowing what your pricing is, it's very easy to get upside down in in um, in a situation. And I would say, furthermore, um, performing on that contract, even the reporting requirements alone, if you don't understand the terms of the contract, there's so much help out here for you. You've got Apex accelerators, they're DoD funded. You've got your SBA reps. You've got consultants like myself. There's so much attorneys. They're probably way more expensive than the first three options, but still they're there. If you don't understand the terms, get the assistance. I worked with an 8A company they were on their third 8A contract, not their third contract, their third 8A contract. And there were there are reporting requirements built into the CFR as it relates to the 8A program. And the terms of their subcontractor agreement were completely just not in compliance with the 8A reporting requirement. So it became kind of damage control, and that you're out of compliance, you're actively performing, and you're trying to hurry up and fix it before somebody notices. So I always say, make sure that you understand the terms. And if anybody is out here telling you that the only thing that you have to read in order to respond is the scope, section L and section M, I don't care who will argue with me. I'll be the first one to tell you they're lying to you. You do need to read the whole thing. You have to make sure, because you can do good work, but if you miss a deadline as part of performance, that could affect your CPARs. And, the admin paper pushing stuff isn't really the strength of a specialty trades or construction contractor. So put someone in that position to kind of manage it and oversee it and make sure that you're in compliance, and your work will speak for itself.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. Yeah, yeah. This is good. So you were So do you do like CPAR? And the CPARs is like a way the government will review you It's almost like a Google review for the government, right? They
Yeah,
create these CPARs, right? Um, so do you do like CPARs control? Because like, I mean, I've done hundreds of projects, and like as bad as I want everything to go well, they don't always go well, right? And
right.
yeah, how do you handle that?
Well, it's about being communicative, right? For example, if you know that you're not going to meet a deadline on, an inspection, or you're not going to get this done in time, or that subcontractor's supplies are delayed, whatever the situation might be, the best thing that you can do is be transparent and communicate that with the government. Don't let them come to you expecting that thing to have been there or that work to have been done. You kind of want to bring that to their attention. And most oftentimes, they'll make the concession for it. You communicated it, you have documentation of it. Things happen. Not every contract is going to go perfectly. There are so many bumps in the road. But this is kind of a start of an opportunity for you to have a relationship with your COR, with your CO, because as long as you're communicating it responsibly, it's not necessarily a deficit. Now, I say that within reason. I am not an attorney. There are tons of contract clauses that could probably contradict what I just said. But for by and large, most of the things that come up that prevent a deadline from slipping by are something that can be communicated with transparency and overcome.
Yeah. No, I'm in total agreement with that. And like when we say communicate, I always recommend do that through email or in writing, because after the fact, when they try to throw that in your review, like I've actually literally like combated a lot of that review and had them and got them to go in there and update it. It was like, hey, look at this email. Like I literally communicated all this stuff. You said it was okay. You provided me an extension, and now all of a sudden you're saying something different in this review. Like, can you?
Right.
I use these reviews to go get more work. Can you please go back in there and adjust it so that it's not as damaging as what the way you've originally articulated. And they've actually gone back in there and updated it. I've had it happen like multiple times. So um and again, the goal is to always do a great job, but like this is construction, and crazy things happen. And then crazy things happen and you get a crazy reviewer, it's just like a recipe for someone, giving you a bad mark. And when you get a bad mark, like you can't just, I was always scared to just, and I always came from a position like I had to accept it. But I got around some people and they're like, dude, you don't have to accept that. If you go and request them and remove that or change it or alter it. And we started doing that, and it's actually worked. Yeah.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. I can't say that I necessarily do audits. I think it's worth mentioning, though, that there have been mutterings. I don't think it's become final yet. But there have been some mutterings about making CPARs negative only, which I was a little disappointed to hear. So the jury's still out on that, whether or not that's going to happen. But and this is an important conversation because, especially because of all the dodging that's happened, and contractors are worried if they haven't already been cut or their scopes have been slashed, are they next? And I will say, while it's not necessarily mandatory other than at contract closeout, if you're a subcontractor, go and ask your prime for a PPQ.
Mm.
There's no harm, they don't always have to give it to you, but especially if you have a good relationship with them, those of you who are subcontractors on government projects, like get those PPQs and stack them, because you might need to use that for past performance if those scopes do get cut. So while I've helped with CPARs in the past as far as, risk mitigation, but that's not necessarily what my strength is, I would say. Um, a negative CPARs, though, like you said, don't don't just roll over and take it, would definitely be my
Yeah.
best advice. Oliver, you made a
Yeah.
very good point. You have to be your own advocate in the
Yeah.
space. You do.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. 100%. So can you talk about some of the wins you've seen from some of your most successful clients? I mean, especially being a consultant, you probably have your hand in a lot of different things, and just interested to see or
Well, I
hear.
mean, just in the last probably 5 or 7 years, my clients have portfolios of more than 2.5 billion. So,
Mm,
I mean, but I can't take credit for those, right? Those aren't all my wins. Some of them,
mhm,
I have a piece of, but not all of them. Um,
mhm,
I would say probably one of the best stories that comes to mind is kind of a SME story where a gentleman came to me. He's a healthcare provider, and he has unique equipment and credentials to be able to support in during disasters, healthcare during wildlife disaster, or I'm sorry, wildfire disasters. And nobody was buying it. He didn't know who to talk to. So we did some research, identified here's the agency that would be most interested in what you had to sell. That guy had one meeting. I introduced him to the small business liaison there. He had one or two meetings, came out with a 3-year BPA um, to provide medical support on site. That was a huge win. He didn't have to bid on any solicitations. He solved a problem um, and presented the solution to the person that had the problem, and he got the contract. So that doesn't always happen in construction, but what is a thing in construction are, those simplified acquisition contracts. Could be micro purchases, probably not too many, but a lot of simplified acquisitions. That's a very easy playground. Some smaller quick wins to generate past performance. Now, that particular client is not at all interested in any other contracts. But sometimes it's not always about the dollar value. Sometimes it's about the story and, creating that generational wealth. He's the only guy that can do that. He's the only human that can provide that service currently today. So he's a single source provider.
yeah, that's awesome. So the BPA, that's blanket purchase agreement. So
Yes.
those are pretty cool. So did he have like any designations, or he was just the only provider, so he was able to get a sole source because of that
It's not something that
being
had ever
alone?
been purchased before.
Wow, that's awesome. That's crazy. How did you even know to like go to that specific agency if it's never been purchased before?
Well, when you've been doing this as long as I have, you kind of understand what each agency needs and sort
Yeah,
of what their
yeah.
missions, what their budgets
Hmm.
support. And
Hmm. Hmm.
in this case, it was either going to be them or FEMA. So,
Mm, mm. Love it. Love it. Yeah, no, like that's a lot of this game is like I remember when I first got into this game, I had a mentor that had been doing government work for the last 20, 25 years. And he told me, "Hey kid, I'm not giving you any of my contracts, but I'll help you get contracts if you can go ahead and find them. I'll help you execute on them." And that was like the little direction that I needed to get, because I was going to the small business events, and it just I was kind of like going in circles, right? But when I got around him, he kind of gave me like the inside scoop, like, hey, say this instead of that. Don't say that, say this. And we got to find people that do this instead of that. And once I got the inside scoop, and I invested with that mentor, it was like, man, I finally started getting results. Like, it took me a year, but I got my first $500,000 contract, and then we landed a $2.6 million project in Albany, Georgia, an $800,000 job up here in DC, $800,000 job for Tyndall Air Force Base down in Panama City, Florida. And we were changing a bunch of like the airfield shelters along the airfield, and another
okay.
$800,000 job at Gainesville for the USDA doing a roof replacement. And it was just game on. So it sounds like you're like one of those superpowers too, where you got those like that little inside scoop, and you tell people to do this instead of that versus just kind of going in
Well,
circles.
it's about the data, right? I mean, I will say a huge contributing factor to my ability to be able to do that is to be able to just synthesize that data. I already kind of have it mapped in my mind what agency, what their missions and what they kind of buy are. But when you have a small business that has unique circumstances, unique capabilities, the data might not give you the full picture. So you might have to, in my case, use my sales experience, targeted market. If there's no data, we just have to go through untraditional methods to be able to find that information. But it's part of the strategy. And that is where my passion lies. If I had my way, I would just be doing strategy. I love
Mm-hmm.
strategy. So if
Mm-hmm.
there's anyone that might be in the audience that's trying to find their way in this market, let's figure out who buys what you sell. Like that's the first step. If you don't know who
Mm-hmm.
buys what you sell, you're shooting blind. And it's free
Yeah.
data,
Yeah.
right? Anyone can go to
Yeah. Yeah.
usaspending.gov and take a
Yeah.
look at who buys what they sell.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Nah, that's game one right there, because that's the 100% the truth. Because that was one of the things that set me in the right direction. Is like I stopped just reaching out to all of the different agencies thinking that they're going to buy my product and service. Like no, like there's specific ones that buy your product and service, and you could see it, and then you could see who buys a lot of it and who buys a little bit of it. I stopped reaching out to people who bought a little bit of it and started reaching out to people who bought a lot of it. And I was like,
Right.
if I just can get 1% of 1% of 1% of that, I'd be golden, And I
Hmm.
just kept telling myself, which kept me moving forward. So, yeah, I totally agree with that. So you brought up simplified acquisition purchases,
Hmm.
and those are interesting, especially in the construction space, because you don't need to provide a bond for them. So I was wondering,
Yeah.
from your standpoint, like what's the best way to go out there and get like simplified acquisition type purchases?
Marketing. Marketing is the best way. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Also, being found when they're looking. So, back to that story that I told earlier, how we cracked the code and then all of a sudden we were found, right? Um, I have had more than three clients just since January 1st of this year be found by the government, invited to bid, and win awards without having to submit a proposal. So your visibility and exposure is excruciatingly important. I can't stress that
Mm-hmm.
enough. That's the
Mm-hmm.
first thing. Proactive marketing, knowing who buys what you sell and making sure that you're on their radar. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then the third thing I will say is going to be if you're doing those first two things, the third thing won't matter as much, right? But the third thing is the SAM.gov syndrome, is what I call it. Everyone thinks that the only way to get a contract is to see a solicitation on SAM.gov, and I am here to tell you that's not true. SAM.gov is a mandatory reporting site. So nothing under 25,000 has to be posted to SAM. So where does that money go? It gets awarded. We see it in the contract data. So if you're not being proactive, you're not putting your hat in the ring for those purchases. Another way we get those purchases is through sources sought notices, requests for information. There's a huge community of contractors that will say, submitting an RFI is a waste of my time. There's no dollar figure attached to it. And in some cases, you're right. There is no guarantee that that is ever going to make it to solicitation. But if you don't put your hat in the ring and use that phase of the procurement process strategically, you're not gonna you're not gonna be an option. So we're seeing a lot of sources sought get posted, award notice gets posted, and we're skipping the solicitation. Well, usually that's because the dollar amount falls underneath that simplified acquisition threshold, and the government has what they need to have based on the results of that research to go ahead and award it. So knowing the rules of the playground is definitely a great way to navigate around it without getting beat up.
Agreed. And what is that threshold dollar amount? I actually don't really play that much in that space. I usually try to stick above $1 million, but what is the threshold? I think it's like, what is it?
It was just
You have
increased. So it was
okay,
250,000, and I believe this administration just increased it to 350,000 for simplified
okay,
acquisitions.
okay.
The
All
micro
right, cool.
purchase
Yeah.
threshold for products went from 10 to 15,000 too. So
Okay.
anybody who might want to create that entry level offer. Now for construction, it's a little different. I wish they would
Mm-hmm.
raise that, but I think it's still only 25 for a micro purchase,
Mm-hmm.
2,500.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. So actually, So I think I said you didn't need a bond. If it goes over 150,000, you're gonna need a bond. So yeah, you're gonna need a bond for some of those. Cool. That's great. All right. Um. So w- from a construction standpoint, I'm going to talk about my case, my scenario. So like we're getting too big, right? Like so like
Hmm.
we've kind of graduated from some of those NACE codes that are $19 million average revenue, right?
Okay.
So now it's like we're looking at those $45 million uh, average revenue for to be considered a small business, right? Now, like, what do companies do when they've graduated from that? Like, where do you see companies go when they've graduated from that?
Well, that depends. It really depends on the company, right? It's funny you bring this up because I just had a conversation this week um, with a veteran-owned company that is about to size out and facing a similar issue. So, you have options. Not always options you like, and I am not an attorney, I'm a strategist. So always consult with your attorney um, before deciding and taking action on any of these options. But if I'm, it would depend. It would depend on my partnerships, right? If you have a lot of partners that are dependent upon your socioeconomic small business status, you may choose to restart. Um, if you are not as codependent on those partnerships and you have a portfolio and a long-term pipeline to grow as a prime on the open market, which is full and open competition, um, you may just let it go. Because at the end of the day, I mean, the small business program is there to help the small businesses grow to where they're not small anymore, essentially. So, it would be evaluating your pipeline and making sure that you're not 100% full of small business opportunities. And if that's the case, then we'd probably have to have an offline conversation.
Yeah. And honestly, that's what that's why, like, that's how we've kind of built our pipeline is through like a lot of these multiple word construction contracts. So it's like, once you're on them, like you go on them as a small business, but like then they're like a 7 year or 5 year or 10 year contract, and then you get like this huge runway to then buy us time to get into some of those like large business like multiple word construction contracts, right? But
Right.
then even some of those are kind of interesting too from the standpoint of like they have all these like minimum project size requirements. So like if you haven't completed a $20 million job, you can't even like bid on that. So like that's why we're really focused on completing like a bigger and larger size projects so that we can have that past performance to get on one of these larger like contract vehicles that are keep moving us into the future after we really graduate being a total small business.
So this actually is something that not a lot of companies know. Um, but if you are a subcontractor to a prime on a federal project, when you are writing your past performance narratives, you're not just taking credit for your portion of that contract. You do get to report the full size of the contract. So if that piece of information might help you get to the next level, um, I'd definitely recommend utilizing it because you may have more past performance than you realize. And a lot of small
Mm.
businesses are that way. If they go install a fence around, a VA clinic, they're kind of thinking, oh, well, my portion of the work was under 100,000, so that's what they're reporting to the government. When in actuality, if you were a named sub on that contractor, there's nothing in the rules that states that you cannot report the total dollar amount. Now, here's the thing is there's
Wow.
data to prove it, right? So you're reporting the contract number. You're being very clear about your role. I'm not saying to lie, right? You were a subcontractor to such and such on this project. Um, but that project dollar amount might be big enough to satisfy that past performance requirement in future contracts.
Mm. Mm.
You don't want to
Wow.
misrepresent by any means. I'm not
Yeah.
telling you to misrepresent, but that's part of the strategy to grow your portfolio to be able to step into more larger prime contracts.
Yeah. 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 And I've seen we've been awarded projects where we didn't hit the minimum threshold for the project, but because there was no one else that had bid on the project that could meet the minimum threshold, we got awarded that project, right? So it's putting your it's just giving yourself the opportunity for someone to say like, hey, I want to roll with these people and giving yourself that opportunity. So I agree with that. I never even thought of that, right? But I mean, at least you're showing a project that was of size. And yeah, you didn't do all of it yourself, but even the prime didn't do all of it themselves. They had a bunch of
Right.
subcontractors as well. So
And at the
it's
end of the
interesting.
day, the work that you're bidding on is probably exactly the work that you did on that contract. You're probably not bidding out of your swim lane anyway, right? You
Hmm.
might be using different partners, but yeah, transferable skills for sure.
Hmm. Cool. That's awesome. This is really good. This is now we got into the nitty gritty of it all today.
We
Normally
did
it's
get a
like
little
big
bit into the
picture.
weeds.
Yeah. Yeah, but we got into some of the nitty gritty. So I know my people who are actually doing it and want to do it and understand the terms and the terminology. They were really geeking out on this one. So how do people get in touch with you?
Anyone can find me. I am on YouTube. You can search GovCon Hacks. We do have a very active channel. I'm on LinkedIn. I can search me there under my name or GovCon Hacks. It'll come right up either way. And by email, ashleyd@duweldev.com. My inbox is open. I love hearing, what small businesses are facing out there, and I love talking to the community. So I welcome you to reach out.
Excellent. Appreciate you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.